Opara Taldor, spring of 4718. The Exaltation Day Gala at the Oparan Senate Building. The Taldan Senate Building was the seat of the senatorial branch of the Taldan government. The structure had existed in one form or another for millennia, though natural disasters, sabotage, and war had partially leveled it several times in the Empire's grand history, leading to many large-scale repairs and revisions. In its current state, it was a grandiose T-shaped edifice constructed from white marble. Ostentatious columns carved with glorious scenes of the nation's history surrounded the building on all sides, while a pronounced flight of precisely 100 stairs ascended to the main entrance. The cobblestone road leading from the great gates of a wide, tall fence that protected the building was a flurry of activity as noblemen and women from across the old empire met and mingled before heading into the building proper. Beyond the gates a long line had formed. It was in this line that all aides, including Aurelius, Demi, Diyanah, and Marius, were forced to queue up and wait for their turn. In fact, they had already been waiting for nearly 2 hours before they realized, looking at a bend in the queue, that they might be waiting for another 2 hours more. "This is quite ridiculous," said Diyanah angrily. "I'm no mere aide. I'm a lord of House Frascati. I shouldn't be in this silly line." "Come on, don't make a scene," said Aurelius. "I think it's moving a little faster now." "It is not," said Demi simply. "Well, I think this is just building anticipation for the big event," said Marius excitedly. "Well, if we continue to wait in this line, we won't even make it to the event," bemoaned Diyanah. Just then a dreary inspector, who looked like she might have been of mixed Taldan and Vudran ancestry, approached them in the line. "Random inspection. You four, come with me." "Now just wait a minute," said Diyanah. "We're finally making some progress and we're getting pulled out of line. I won't stand for it." Aurelius reached up and put a hand on Diyanah's shoulder. "It can't be a coincidence that the four of us are being pulled out together for a random inspection. Let's go." As soon as the inspector pulled them out of the line and into one of the tents, and they were out of earshot, she said, "Thank you, sir. I had to hurry things along for the four of you, on behalf of our mutual friend." Aurelius winked at Diyanah. "Told you." "About time," huffed Diyanah. "I was beginning to worry we'd be in the line all day." "Before I help get you lot through, none of you are carrying any weapons, are you?" Does this count?" asked Diyanah, indicating his quarterstaff. "Ah, yes, that counts. I'll hold on to that." "It's a ceremonial stave of Aurori. It's a religious item." "Yes, it's also quite clearly a weapon." "It's a walking stick, maybe?" suggested Diyanah. "Now, I don't mean to make your head any bigger than it already is, but you're the healthiest, most athletic specimen of a man in the Senate building. No one is going to believe you need a walking stick, sir." "What if there's a fight?" he asked. She seemed a little exasperated. "Well, there shouldn't be. If there is a fight, I'll be around. My name is Katheer Zalar. If you need it, call for me. I'll find a way of getting you the big stick. But you won't need it." Okay," said Diyanah, handing over the staff. "Anyway, these are my real weapons." And he flexed spectacularly. Demi leaned over to Katheer. "I also don't imagine there'd be a fight, but if something untoward were to happen, I don't suppose the armory has a supply of short bows. Just in case, of course." "Well, I don't know why you're worried about a fight at the big gala either, but yes, I'll be near the armory, and if you need it, I'll get a bow to you." "I'd be indebted," said Demi, with a slight curtsy. "All right, off you go, the four of you. I have places to be and things to do," said Katheer, ushering them roughly through the gates, onto the grounds of the Senate building. Martella's four agents ascended the 100 marble steps to the main level. The entry gallery of the building was labeled the Arcade of Triumphs. It celebrated Taldor's abundant military and political glories. Banners and trophies lined the halls of the arcade, some displayed openly, while others rested behind intricate glass cases, while armor stands and display cases presented countless artifacts belonging to the great heroes and soldiers of Taldan history. A score of Taldan phalanx troops stood at attention, acting as both ceremonial honor guards for the Senate and guides to some of the military assets on display. Then Aurelius spotted the target, the mutton-chop-sporting old cudger Grand Strategos Maxillar Pytherius, talking enthusiastically to Grand Duke Vobelar. Diyanah recognized the fire in his friend's eyes. "Easy there," he said. "You're not going to kill him here. Just keep your distance and report back to the lady, right?" "Yeah, I've got this," he said, and he separated himself gingerly from the group to get a closer look at his target. Beyond the Arcade of Triumphs was a breathtaking and walled garden that separated one portion of the Senate building from the other. There was no exterior access to the garden. Catered patios, segregated by short iron fences, coordinated military displays, and even a makeshift zoo of imported animals and magical beasts which filled the open spaces here. There was even a small hive of bees busily pollinating the exotic flowers and making the honey that was used in the Senate kitchens. Many of the senior nobles appeared to be enjoying the breaks between ceremonies in this open space. Here they saw a familiar face, Martella Lotheed, and she was chatting with none other than the princess herself. Eutropia had drawn quite a crowd around her in the garden, and she was accompanied by her large hound, Taldogus. Marius wasn't sure that he had seen that pets were allowed at the gala, but perhaps this was a special exception just for the princess. A third friend had joined them in conversation, another woman, this one a little older than the other two, but attempting to mask it under a good deal of makeup. This must be the other friend Martella had mentioned, Lady Gloriana of House Morilla, an old Taldan house whose great sphere of influence was the city of Absalom, much more so than it was their original home of Taldor. Martella saw them approach and waved them over. "Princess Eutropia," she said, "these are some of the friends I made at auction last week. Have you met Demi before?" "I haven't had the pleasure," she said, holding Demi's hand, as Demi curtsied elegantly in the Taldan style. "But of course I've seen her in the Senate building before. I come here as always representing Grand Duchess Falspar, who could not make it today. She wants you to know that you have her full support in your new legislature." "Please thank the Grand Duchess for me," said the princess, "and a great thank you to you as well for coming out all this way and supporting us on this most important day." "And this is Lord Diyanah of House Frascati," said Martella, pointing at Diyanah, who on cue immediately bowed low before the princess. "My princess, point me to one of your servants and I shall have them collect no fewer than 5 barrels of Frascati's finest from my valet outside, just to thank you for your audience today." The princess laughed slightly, well used to such displays at this point. "I've heard your family makes great wines," she added, "and I will make sure it is collected. Yes, and Lord Diyanah will also want you to know that he'll be bidding for one of the open Senate seats in the summer and would like to count on our support. In the meantime, I've asked if he could help keep things on track tonight." "Oh, very well. I thank you, Lord Frascati, and I wish you the best of luck with your senatorial bid." And finally there was... Martella glanced around as she had lost Marius in the crowd. Then her gaze was drawn down by a soft bark as Marius was on his knees playing with Taldogus. The big dog gave Marius a great big lick across his face, and Marius laughed out loud and called him a good dog. "And this is Marius," she explained, and chuckled to the princess, "who seems to have made a new best friend already. He's a tavern keep in Eastport district, a fine establishment." "And where is Aurelius?" asked Martella of Diyanah. "Already tailing his quarry," he explained. She gave him a knowing glance and tapped the side of her nose conspiratorially. "Very well, that introduction shall wait. Princess, you should know it is 30 minutes past the hour already." "Heavens, it is, isn't it?" said Eutropia. "Time certainly flies, doesn't it? Very well, best to make a speech now before everyone has had a little too much to remember it." Lady Gloriana Marilla loudly clinked her glass and declared to those gathered in the garden that Princess Eutropia would like to address them. With the announcement, the crowd gave Eutropia some space, and Gloriana helped the princess climb onto a stone pulpit to be seen and heard above the throngs. "My friends and colleagues, and even my assorted enemies, it is wonderful to see you all out in your finery beneath the beautiful stars tonight. With any luck, the weather will be the only thing that refuses to change this evening. We have all gathered here tonight to honor Calbio of Breezy Creek, a master artisan and a true patriot for his exquisite skill and service to our glorious empire. Master Calbio demonstrates so eloquently that a heart may be noble regardless of the stature of one's birth, and while it may be premature, I hope to be the first to congratulate you, sir, on the exaltation you will see tonight, and welcome you into the ranks of Taldor's long-lived aristocracy." As she said these words, Marius noticed for the first time the awkward young man in the crowd, like himself, a simple commoner, sticking out like a sore thumb among the gathered nobility. Marius felt a great well of sympathy for the boy, who was clearly finding all of this overwhelming. So this was the honored guest of the Exaltation Day, a fitting choice, he thought. Then out of the corner of his eyes he noticed something else. One of the serving staff had broken away from the main group, and was headed towards the apiary with a strangely colored rod of metal. He glanced back at his companions, and he saw that Demi too had seen this. She gave him a look that affirmed his own suspicions. The man was out to cause some trouble. Marius tried to discreetly make his way over to the apiary, and he could see the man had deposited the metal rod in it. It was some kind of alchemical device, designed to agitate the bees, no doubt to embarrass the princess during her speech. Marius reached into the hive and removed the rod before it could cause too much trouble, but of course the agitated bees got very defensive, and Marius had to move quickly. All along the length of his forearm they stung him. A great welt of bruises raised up on his arm as the buzzing insects attacked. He ignored the pain and grabbed the rod, withdrawing it and slipping it into his small shoulder pack where it could do no more harm. He then shuffled back to the party, his arm in considerable pain. He tried to look for where the saboteur had gone, but he had been lost in the shuffle. The princess's speech continued, uninterrupted. But we gather here to discuss matters of state as well, and just as the Exaltation reminds us that our glorious empire must always look out into the world to refresh the greatness of its leadership, we must all look out into the world around us and see how it has grown. The child nations our empire birthed, Andoran, Cheliax, Lastwall, have grown strong by examining the great traditions they inherited from our motherland, and embracing those relevant to this new world, and discarding those that held them back. So too should we, this very night, examine one of Taldor's oldest traditions, primogeniture, with eyes wide open, to determine whether it has held us back from the glory and stability our wayward states have found. Our obligation tonight is not about one person or one vote in the Senate. It's about the nation we love, and about ensuring that our nation does not fall behind the times. We are the inheritors of mighty Asland, and I say we must work together to avoid sharing that old empire's fate. Taldor endures. Her speech was met with a number of claps, but not a small number of jeers and heckles as well. As she concluded, Demi came over to inspect Marius's arm. She turned it over gingerly in her hands. He had suffered many stings, and they looked swollen and terrible. "Are you in a great deal of pain?" she asked.
"Yes," he said. "I'd like to pretend I'm fine, but those bees are no practical joke or laughing matter. If the whole hive had been agitated, someone could have died."
"Hold still," she said. Marius could feel her emit a low hum as she waved her hand over his arm. The stings reduced in their swelling, and the pain began to go away.
"Oh, thank you,"
said Marius, recognizing this to be a light curative spell.
"Are you a cleric, Demi?"
"No, that was a kind of song magic. You might call me a bard, I suppose."
I would never have guessed it," said Marius. "You don't look like a typical bard. You don't carry an instrument, and you're not, can I say, flamboyant?"
Demi chuckled to herself and smirked. "I don't know if I should be offended by that. My voice is my instrument, and I can be flamboyant when I need to be. You just haven't seen it yet." Diyanah came over to the two of them. "Hey, did I hear right that someone was trying to agitate the bees during the princess's speech?" he asked.
"That's right,"
said Marius, and he slipped open his pack.
"They were using some kind of alchemical device. It smells awful."
"Great, give me that. I know exactly what to do with it," he said, snatching it. "I'll see you all later." Diyanah headed back to the Arcade of Triumphs, where he spotted his friend Aurelius discreetly pretending to look at the historical artifacts and occasionally joining in conversation with other gathered senators, always striving to remain within earshot of Maxillar Pytherius and Erginus Vobilar, who were still walking the arcade together. Diyanah waited for his window. Eventually, Grand Duke Vobilar called for his valet to deliver a message, and then Diyanah sprang into action, making something of a scene as he bumped through the crowd and discreetly dropped the alchemical rod into the servant's pack. Then he called loudly at everyone. "Attendants of the Arcade of Triumphs, I have an important message, and I shall need the guards as well." He had certainly gotten everyone's attention. "Just earlier in the garden, the princess gave a heartfelt speech, but not all were pleased by her moving words. Some gathered here conspired to embarrass her. A man tried to place an alchemical rod to agitate the bees in the garden during the speech, a petty act, and I have identified him. That man." He pointed to Vobilar's servant. "Please have him searched at once." Grand Duke Vobilar and Grand Strategos Pytherius just seemed generally annoyed by this loud show from the muscular Frascati lord, but the guards did come over and search his pack. One of the guards withdrew the alchemical rod. Is this the item, sir?" asked the guard. "Aha!" said Diyanah. "Exactly as I suspected. A petty act from a petty lord, I say." He indicated Lord Vobilar as he said this. Vobilar looked indignant. "If this is true, I know nothing of it. I shall have the man beaten for insolence." Murmurs went through the crowd, and Vobilar, embarrassed by the whole proceeding, whispered something to Pytherius, and then made a swift exit. Aurelius watched the whole affair with something of a smirk. Not so much subtlety when my old friend Diyanah is about, but I suppose he does get the job done, he thought to himself. He looked up and saw the Grand Strategos hovering over him.
"Hello there, young sir," said the imposing man. "I couldn't help but notice that whichever way I turn, you are creeping around not far from me. Are you perhaps interested in what I have to say?" "So much for the subtle arts of the Katheer mages of the Vale," thought Aurelius. "I'm off my game. Being so close to him is distracting me. No, sir. Must be a coincidence. I'm just a Taldan history enthusiast, enjoying the artifacts in this arcade. Must have been walking a similar circuit. I was about to leave, anyway." He offered the Grand Strategos a short bow and stepped away quickly, trying to avoid showing any signs of his hatred for the general on his face. Aurelius tapped his aide badge and sent a telepathic missive to Martella. "Sorry," he said. "Looks like I've been made. Someone else will have to tail the Grand Strategos." "It's okay," replied Martella. "There's other work to be done. See if you can track down Duke Leonardo Centimus. Diyanah, maybe you can pick up where Aurelius left off with the Grand Strategos." I'll try," messaged back Diyanah. "I kind of made a big show of myself just now. I'm afraid subtlety isn't exactly my strong suit." "Do what you can," said Martella. "And Marius, I have a first task for you as well. Come to me. I need you to deliver a sealed letter to Count Orlundo Zespire in the archives." Meanwhile, Demi had made her way across the garden. Beyond the enclosed courtyard was the rest of the building. The entry chamber immediately beyond the courtyard was called the Emperor's Hall, a gathering space featuring countless statues and portraits of previous grand princes. Beyond the hall, 2 doors on either side of a curved wall on the opposite side of the hall provided admittance to the Senate chamber. West of the Emperor's Hall, the west wing of the Senate building, were the servants' quarters, which for this event had been converted into a vast kitchen and preparation area. East of the hall were the archives, a vast library that acted as a repository of haphazardly curated books, Senate minutes, and genealogy records left open to the scrutiny of the senators. Demi's business was up ahead in the Senate chamber. Normally closed to non-senators, the vast circular Senate chamber had been open to special guests during the grand day of Exaltation, and myriad would-be nobles had taken the opportunity to duck in and live out a few minutes of power fantasy, issuing mock legislation or engaging in lively debates. Some senators and other legitimate nobility had gathered in here as well. Baron O'Cara was among them. Demi walked gracefully over to him and curtsied in her precise, elegant way. "Baron O'Cara," she addressed simply. "Miss Demetria, proxy to Grand Duchess Falspar," replied O'Cara formally with a curt bow. "Thank you," she said. "A mutual friend of ours suggested I speak to you about the upcoming vote on primogeniture reform. If I may be direct, what are your feelings on the subject?" O'Cara smiled the smile of a diplomat and said, "Why, Miss Demetria, you know well that I do not hold a Senate seat. Such matters are above the purview of a simple baron of Tandak Prefecture, such as myself." O'Cara was, as he said, a baron from Tandak Prefecture, which, despite sharing a similar name to northern Tandak, where Grand Duchess Falspar held power, was in fact separated by quite some distance, and the mighty Verduran forest as well. Demi's was a northern border prefecture, whereas O'Cara's was much more central and closer to the capital. "Oh, come now," said Demi. "We both know you are politically opinionated, and your war record makes your voice an influential one. You really don't have a point of view on this?" O'Cara hemmed and hawed for a moment, but he said, "I appreciate your directness, Demi. To be honest, I know it's an important matter to many in the Senate, but it seems like a relatively minor matter to me." "You have a daughter, don't you?" asked Demi. "Yes, I do, and no son. But I intend to write a will, which supersedes primogeniture anyway. As you see, for the most part this feels like faux reform, masked as hollow posturing. I apologize for my bluntness, of course. I know some won't have wills made, and it may matter in those circumstances. But I also am a big believer in tradition. Taldor is a nation steeped in tradition, and its power comes in part from the fortitude of its people, a fortitude reinforced by its long millennia of history, and its honoring of what has come before. So on this topic I ask, if it's not meaningful, why make a big fight for it, especially as it could lead to a more general erosion of the culture?" Demi nodded thoughtfully. "I take your point, Baron O'Cara, and I do understand the importance of tradition. We're similar in one way. We are both adoptees of the Taldan tradition, but we ultimately came from somewhere else, didn't we?" "I suppose we did," said O'Cara, "though my family has been Taldan nobility for almost 10 generations now." "Yes, a great story, and one I'm familiar with. Your ancestors supported the armies of Grand Strategos Erestos Marbaran in his conquest of the southern Katapesh and his crossing at the Nadele Gap. For their support they were granted lands and titles back in the homeland. Have you ever been to Garant, or the Mwangi Expanse, to see some of your family's oldest traditions?" Now, said O'Cara. I do appreciate a good bit of back-and-forth politicking as much as the next aristocrat, but there's no need to shove my words of tradition back in my face. The answer is no. Neither me nor my family have spent much time back in Garand in the last 500 years, to be honest. I have thought about it personally, but I worry I would have so little in common with the people I came from that I would find it unsatisfying. Well, I certainly apologize if I've caused offense, said Demi. I was actually going somewhere with this line of inquiry. I only meant to say that your ancestors were Zenge people of the western Wangi savannas, before your family allied with the Taldans to support their conquest of the White City. And they had very different traditions about inheritance, as I understand it. Okera laughed. Now I see what you're getting at. You're very well read, Miss Demetria. You want me to recall that the Zenge savanna tribes are matriarchal, and that in my original culture, wealth and inheritance were passed by way of the female line, don't you? I mean, just speaking from the point of view of tradition, of course, she said. Well, Demi, I have found this conversation delightful. I don't disagree. Tradition is a story we tell ourselves, nothing more, and traditions can and will change over time. And we carry many traditions with us, some of which are conflicting. You have given me much food for thought. I can't promise I'll be the champion for your cause that you're looking for, but you certainly won't hear an objection from me, and at the very least, you've made a friend, one who is impressed with how well you know an audience. Thank you, Baron, said Demi. I will take my leave now, but I certainly hope we have the chance to cross paths once again very soon. As do I. While Demi was bantering with Baron Okera, Aurelius and Marius were making their way to the archives. It was quite a library. Aurelius was aware that the Imperial Archives could have been one of Galarian's great collections of transcribed knowledge, had any care been invested in its upkeep. Centuries of redirected funding and Senate-sanctioned pruning of sensitive information, however, had ruined this once invaluable resource. Nevertheless, he knew gems could be found here if one searched well enough. Aurelius and Marius had come for slightly different purposes. Marius had made his way back there to briskly track down Count Orlundo Zespire to deliver a message on behalf of Lady Martella. Like Diyanah, Orlundo was the third-born son of his family, and as such stood little chance of inheriting much more than a title. Service in the Navy, though, made him a minor hero back home, and Grand Prince Stavian III had thereafter appointed him to a vacant seat in the Senate, where he continued to represent the interests of Tandak Prefecture, the same significant central domain that Baron Okera was from as well. Count Zespire, said Marius, only slightly out of breath. I come bearing a letter from Lady Lothide. Zespire read the letter carefully, and such a wide array of expressions played out on his face that Marius could make no sense of what was being read, and he dared not pry and read the letter himself. After reading it, Zespire moved to a small desk, of which there were many scattered around the archives, and he used a quill and inkpot to draft a letter of his own. Good Porter, said the Count, do me a kindness and make sure this letter is sent to Senator Amadorian Duo, with all haste. He will likely be found in the viewing gallery, on the terrace above the garden. You will need to take the stairs at the end of the archives to go up a level. He slipped Marius 2 silver pieces for his trouble. Marius nodded at the Count and took off. While this was going on, Aurelius had tracked down Duke Leonardo Centimus, an attending Duke of Grand Duchess Caesara Tiberan, of, once again, Tandak Prefecture. Leonardo Centimus was an intellectual and tinkerer, whose head for systems made him a good administrator, but he was, by reputation, a little awkward with people. Aurelius also noted that Leonardo's legs were crippled, some damage beyond the ken of the clerics to repair, unfortunately. He was therefore confined to a wheelchair, which, though elegantly made, meant he kept his valet near him at all times, because it often became tiresome to move around. Aurelius found that Leonardo's wheelchair had been positioned beside a section of the library marked History of Taldor, and Leonardo appeared to be thumbing through a book titled Great Battles of the Fourth Army. Aurelius leaned into his knowledge of Taldan history and coughed slightly. Ah, the many bloody conquests of General Castellus. It said that the Isgari Kelids were particularly vicious foes. Leonardo harumphed slightly. Oh, very misunderstood foes, more likely. Castellus was a brute. He could have learned much by paying more attention to how General Corin pacified the West. Are you a student of history? He asked. I'm a disciple of Grand Duke Abernathus. I'm a student of the arcane arts, more so than history, but I like to be well-rounded. That's a strong opinion you have on Castellus. Not sure every Taldan patriot would agree. Poppycock! The evidence is clear. 3,000 dead at the Battle of the Foam, another 5,000 at the Goldfalls Melt, and almost 10,000 in the taking of Carpendon, not to mention the needless bodies thrown against the Fae of the Arthfell, only to have the Druid kings declare themselves independent a century later. Andoran was won, but only because we brought to bear overwhelming force. There was no guile or strategy there.
Sounds like a certain Grand Strategos who is High General today, suggested Aurelius tentatively, knowing full well that not everyone hated the general as much as he did.
Careful, son, said Leonardo. You're drifting from history into politics, and I don't like to be so open about my politics as I do about my history. Plus, I think you'll find the Grand Strategos has a good deal more guile than he lets on behind the hardened soldier persona he puts out there.
Very well, said Aurelius, retreating from that line of inquiry. Any books about the Fourth Army conquest you'd recommend, then? To get a more unbiased view of history, of course.
Yes,
said Leonardo, excited to return to the subject of his passion.
I'd suggest Giacomo Venti's treatise. Oh, where is it? Just down there.
He turned around to look for his valet, but the young man had stepped away when Aurelius had approached. Leonardo seemed flustered for a moment, and then he went to turn the wheels on his chair, but they jammed up slightly, and he shook the whole device with great frustrated strength. Please, said Aurelius, allow me. And he pushed the chair towards the indicated section of books. Leonardo seemed momentarily indignant at being pushed, but actually seemed quite relieved when only a heartbeat later he could retrieve the book he sought. Leonardo quickly recomposed himself and offered the book.
This one.
Aurelius picked it up and looked it over. He read the title out loud. A War of Attrition, a close examination of the tactics employed during 4 seminal battles of the Fourth Great Army. Looks thorough, he added.
The best books are, said Leonardo. Take it. Honestly, this library is so poorly curated these days no one will even notice it's missing. Return it someday, though, when you are satisfied. Someone else may find it in the future and get some value from it, too.
I will, said Aurelius, slipping the book into his pack. It will be our secret. Also, I hope it wasn't out of turn that I moved your chair. Your valet seemed to have stepped away for a moment.
No, it's quite all right. Actually, better that you did. Stupid thing keeps jamming up anyway. Others in your position would have let me battle with it before lifting a finger to help, so I appreciate it. I'm used to all these nobles perceiving my physical limitations as a more general weakness, and it grates on me. I don't require my legs to rule, nor to keep my mind sharp.
I thought you didn't discuss politics, said Aurelius, seizing the opportunity.
Was that political or personal? Said Leonardo.
Could be both, suggested Aurelius.
Very well, you are a clever young man. I suppose my life experiences have indeed led me to the invariable conclusion that any person who is capable of rule should be afforded the opportunity, regardless of the condition of their body.
I agree, Duke Centimus. You are a gentleman and a scholar, and I hope we get to talk more before the night is up. Aurelius felt a little redeemed after his failed attempt to tail the Strategos. He thumbed the aid badge and sent a missive to the group. Looks like the Duke Leonardo Centimus is on our side. Baron O'Cara is friendly too, added Demi, though he likely won't be outspoken. Nothing to report down here with the general, added Diyanah, who was doing his best to blend in and keep a watchful eye out for his quarry. By this time, Marius had reached the gallery. The terrace on the second floor of the Senate building acted as an observation deck to the events on the garden courtyard. Much of the gallery seemed dedicated to entertaining the children of various nobles, with one particularly extravagant performance drawing the eye. "Come, children," called a halfling harlequin, "and be mesmerized by me, Wisilica the Fantabulous." Wisilica's black and red checkered attire was complemented by heavily applied makeup, embellishing her childish face to resemble that of a silly raccoon. As she tumbled and juggled, Marius couldn't help but be distracted for a moment. In one instance, she looked directly at him, tumbled under his legs, and back out towards the children before somersaulting and brandishing a broad smile showing off a set of immaculate white teeth. The children all clapped and laughed, and Marius reminded himself he was on a mission. He spotted Amadorian duo overlooking the garden. When he joined him there, he could see Martella, Eutropia, and their friend Gloriana were still down in the courtyard. "Senator," said Marius, "I have a message for you from Count Zespire." Duo read it over, and as he did so, Marius couldn't help but notice that he looked a little nervous. "I'm sorry, I have no writing utensil, but if you could pass a message on verbally, that would be greatly appreciated. To the Lady Gloriana Morella, as she's just down there in the courtyard." "What would you like me to say?" asked Marius. "Just tell her that Senator Duo will try his best, but he's under a tremendous amount of pressure. That's all. Thank you." Marius considered inquiring further, but decided after all he was just the messenger. He gave a casual glance once again to Basilica, and then again around the room, and his eyes settled on another noblewoman, matching the description of Countess Abriella Pace.
"I've spotted another one of our targets, up here on the gallery," said Marius to the others. "I had some success with Centimus, so I'll try the Countess as well," replied Aurelius, making his way from the archives to the stairs. Meanwhile, back in the Arcade of Triumphs, Diyanah stepped away from Grand Strategos Maxillar Pytherius, because there was some sort of commotion in the entrance hall. The most important figure of the night had arrived, none other than Grand Prince Stavian III, Emperor of Taldor. He was followed by an entourage of the Ulfin Guard. By ancient agreement between the Thanelands of the far north and Taldor, the Emperor always travelled with a company of these honour-bound northern soldiers. Blond and bearded, with hair wound in tight braids, these fierce warriors also had weapons and armour not normally permitted in the Senate. The entourage was given a wide berth as they moved their way through the arcade, and the Grand Prince made a direct line for Grand Strategos Pytherius. The two exchanged quick words that Diyanah could not overhear, and then the two headed out towards the courtyard. "Hey everyone, Diyanah here," he said. "The Grand Prince has just arrived, and he's taken the General with him. It felt too suspicious if I just up and followed from here, so can someone else please pick up the tale?" "I can follow," said Demi. The courtly bard followed gracefully as they crossed the courtyard and entered the Emperor's hall. The Grand Prince ushered the General into one of the private offices there, and they entered alone. The Ulfin Guard stood vigilant outside. "We won't be able to tail the Emperor or the General until they emerge from their meeting," reported Demi. "We can try to keep an eye on their meeting room, but the Grand Prince and his entourage don't keep a low profile. Something tells me from here on out when they move we'll be aware." Marius had made it back to the courtyard. "Lady Marilla," he said, slightly out of breath, as this running messages had him going all over the place. "Senator Duo says he'll try his best, but he's under a lot of pressure." Gloriana seemed alarmed. "That's not good at all." She called over Martella. "I think we have some nefarious actors placing some undue pressure on Duo to change his vote," she said simply. "Any idea who?" asked Martella. The two looked up to the gallery levels from the garden. "Yes, I have a guess," said Gloriana. "Marius, that's your name, right?" Yes," he said, honestly surprised that Martella's other friend knew his name. He suddenly felt strangely good about himself, important somehow. Gloriana indicated a tall woman in a green dress on the gallery. "See over there, that's Melphine Trant, the daughter of Senator Trant. She's a belligerent, narcissistic ass, and a bully as well. If she's here, it's likely to intimidate one or more of the junior senators into backing her father. From where she's positioned, it looks like Duo is her target. If you could keep an eye on her and quietly intercede if she should try anything, that might relax the young senator." "Maybe too late," observed Martella. "Duo's leaving the gallery. Looks like Trant is following. She will likely pull him into one of the closed offices on the second level when he's out of the crowds. Marius, get to it, but be careful. If there is a scuffle of any kind, the guards here are likely to be much more generous to her, a high-born lady, than they are to you, a common-born half-orc." "I'll be careful," said Marius. Marius tapped the aid badge. "Possible trouble on the second level," he said. "I'm going to intercept, and could maybe use some help." Aurelius was midway through his chat with Countess Pache, but Diyanah was already behind him, as he had left the arcade and had been mingling with others in the garden. Nearly as big as Marius was, the two were quite the intimidating pair when together. "Come on," said Diyanah. "Let's go frighten a dame." "Sounds like I need to come with the two of you," said Demi. "No telling what sort of trouble you'll get up to alone." By the time the three of them reached the second level of the Senate building, they arrived just in time to see Dame Melphine Trant alongside a few of her sycophants, cornering Senator Duo and shoving him roughly into a meeting room labelled the Beldam II Conference Hall. At 6'1", Dame Melphine was a towering, broad-shouldered, athletic young woman, and despite her recent coming out as a refined young lady among Oparan society, she remained happy to leverage her size and strength to intimidate her father's political rivals. However, at 6'4" and 6'2" respectively, Marius and Diyanah were not as easily intimidated as the meek senator was. "Why don't you release the senator back to us?" said Diyanah. Trant turned to face them. "I did 2 years military service in the phalanx. You two may be big, but I fought bigger." She held up her fists, ready for a fight. The three friends that accompanied Trant, all bored bullying sons of local aristocratic families she had befriended before her coming out as a debutante, similarly seemed pleased at the opportunity to punch something. "Honestly, let's not be silly," said Demi, stepping into the room. "Sleep," she hummed, in that strange resonant voice of hers when she activated her magic. Dame Melphine Trant stumbled as she resisted the magical spell. Her three friends, however, all dropped like stones, snoring softly on the floor. "Still fancy your chances?" asked Diyanah.
Dame Melfine looked around in a panic. Then it became quite clear she was about to call out for the guards. "I said sleep," whispered Demi harshly again. This time Melfine succumbed, dropping to the ground and lying unconscious alongside her friends. "Come on, Senator Duo. We're friends of Lady Marilla. You're quite safe with us." Duo nervously followed them out. "Nice work back there," whispered Marius to her as they left. "I was really worried Diyanah would get us into a scrape, and he'd probably be okay, but I'd be out of the Gala, I think." They were interrupted by Aurelius over the aid badges. "Everyone okay?" he asked. "Yep," said Diyanah. "Turns out Demi was all we needed on this one. Melfine and her friends are sleeping it off." "Good, I just finished chatting with Countess Pache. She may vote with us, but she might not. My read on her is that she is agreeable and endearing to those she considers useful or empowering, but entirely dismissive of anyone that can't advance her station. Outwardly a firm ally of Princess Eutropia and the reform of primogeniture, but Countess Pache is not a true believer. She will ally herself with whoever offers her an advantage. I reckon she's just as likely to betray her allies should better opportunities present themselves." "Great work," said Martella. "That's actually very useful intel, Aurelius. I had suspected as much, but I haven't had the chance to confirm myself. I'll make it a point to check in with her before the vote, just to make sure she knows her vote will be appreciated. You can all head back to the garden now. A light supper is about to be served, and it will be a good chance for us to reconvene." "Well, in that case, I have one more pit stop to make before the wine is served," said Marius. He made his way to the servants' hall and walked through the open double doors. No one batted an eyelid at his presence there. He made his way over to the wine cellar, and fortunately his years of bartending had given him a keen eye for the sorting of liquor. He quickly found the 150-year-old Oparos Red and discreetly delivered the tampering agent. "All sorted," said Marius when he reached the rest of the group in the courtyard. "And just in time," smiled Martella. "They'll be serving shortly." Servants began to bring out the supper, placing various expensive cheeses, fruits, pastries, and wines out on the tables, or carrying platters around to those unseated to offer momentary repast. Socializing seemed to become even easier for our 4 co-conspirators as interested parties jockeyed for positions at the table or in food lines, speaking with whomever they wound up close to. Marius, in particular, found himself sat at a table across from the man of the hour, Calbio of Breezy Creek. The young lad seemed slightly uncomfortable wearing the clothing of noble finery he had been put in, as he was constantly fidgeting with the cuffs or scratching at his neck. His calloused hands, simple hairstyle, and sun-beaten face all set him apart from the other guests, as did his broad and genuine smile. "Do you often make it out to big fancy galas like this?" asked Calbio. Marius laughed out loud. "Do I look the sort?" he asked. "I would say you cut a fine figure in that cream jacket you're wearing," said Calbio, and then second-guessing himself, he added, "If that's not a rude thing to say." "Not at all," said Marius. "Actually, truth be told, I like to dress well, but these are the finest clothes I've ever worn. The Lady Lothide had them made for me. They are exceptionally well-tailored. I will be in her debt for a long time to come, I think." "Well, you carry yourself so confidently. It seems like you really belong." Marius did a reasonably good job of hiding how much he appreciated hearing those words, although he also knew this was the perspective of someone that didn't actually live in this world. He decided he might try his hand at some advice to the young man. "Well, if there's one thing I've learned in my short time around these royal types, it's that everything they do, it's about confidence." "Wow, I sure feel like I could learn a lot from you," said Calbio, completely genuinely. "Well, stick around. I think I've done most of what the lady has asked me for tonight. Hopefully the rest of the night I can just appreciate what a rare opportunity I've been blessed with. I look forward to seeing you honored. The nobility could do with more genuine folk such as yourself among their number." "Oh, wait," said Marius, suddenly distracted by something across the way. "I want to see this." A servant carrying a familiar bottle of Oparos Red was pouring it for the Grand Duke Selvingian of the Lingian Prefecture and Grand Duke Delridia of the Moda Prefecture. As he did so, he announced its provenance. "My lords, the Honourable Count Bartleby Lothide of Marat County, Tandak Prefecture, wishes to apologize for his absence from tonight's events and humbly asks that you appreciate this fine bottle of Oparos Red from his holdings near the capital, a 150-year-old varietal reserved for a special occasion such as this." As they tasted the fouled wine, one of them cried out, "What kind of mockery is this? Does Bartleby seek to make fools of us?" Martella stopped by Calbio and Marius and chuckled. "That was excellent. Thank you, Marius," she said. "Petty, but deeply pleasing." "You don't like your brother, I take it?" "I'm a bastard by blood.
Meg Hator Lothede was my father, but the Duchess Carvilia was not my mother. But Bartleby was always a bastard by inclination. He never let me forget my parentage, so sometimes I like to pay him back in kind. Have you any brothers or sisters?
Lots, actually, said Marius. We had big families among the Half-Orc traveling communities of the Hilllands, but I left when I was a boy, and I made my own way to the city. Honestly, it's probably even bigger now than when I left, but I don't imagine I'll be seeing them ever again. They have their life, and I have mine.
Well, my family is not so easily escaped, said Martella. At this point there was a ringing of bells. The Senate was being called to the Senate chamber. It was time to discuss matters of state, to vote, and to finalize any matters of the Senate before the final Exaltation event would occur. Let's see if our work paid off, said Martella. As everyone headed to the Senate chamber, Martella pulled Marius aside. You seem to be getting along with Calbio, the man of the hour. If you don't mind, after the Exaltation event, seek him out and pass this along. Martella handed him a letter, neatly folded and sealed with a wax embossed with a simple heart. When Marius asked about the content, she explained that it was from his parents, who couldn't afford to travel into Opara for the ceremony, and that she understood the letter to be of a personal and emotional nature, and so Calbio's parents asked that it not be delivered until after the big day.
Of course, said Marius. I'll be sure to honor their wishes.
The Senate chamber was a great circle centered around a raised dais for a speaker. Above the main chamber was an observation deck for additional aides, yet aides seemed to be scattered around the floor as well. The political ruling body of Taldor spread out 20 feet below the observation deck. Dozens of senators and their immediate aides scurried about. As a proxy voter, Demi had reserved slot for the Falspar family, and she invited Aurelius, Diyanah, Marius, and even Calbio to join her on the floor. Inside, the cacophony of voices was almost deafening, and it seemed like the ceaseless chatter would continue endlessly, until suddenly the magically amplified voice of the Senate speaker interrupted the noise.
Thank you all. I would ask that our observers please be silent and seat themselves. We will now begin voting on addendum number 22,087, the reformation of the ancient law of primogeniture, specifically the matter of the issuance of inheritance and aristocratic title solely through the male line.
Following this proclamation, the speaker began calling on individual senators, one at a time, to support or oppose the repeal. Early declarations split evenly between the options, with many senators abstaining entirely, and only about halfway through the process did votes begin to favor Princess Eutropia's bid to end primogeniture. By the end of the tabulations, the reform motion appeared to have passed, with roughly 60% of the Senate backing. The speaker took a moment to compose himself, seemingly shocked by the results, before continuing to formally announce the results of the vote.
And so, the final tally for addendum 22,087, the reform of primogeniture, with 36 abstentions, the final tally stands at 107 for, 79 against. The addendum passes, pending, of course, a closed Senate recount to certify the results. But this, of course, means that among other business tonight, the Senate would like to recognize Princess Eutropia Stavian I as the new heir to the Primogen crown and the first rightful heir the Empire has seen in the last 20 years. Congratulations.
With the declaration made, the chamber exploded in a riot of applause and condemnation. Swept up in the excitement, Marius jumped up and cheered in delight, and following his lead, so too did Aurelius and Diyanah, even though neither of them had particularly cared about the vote until just about a week ago. Only Demi kept her composure, but she offered a pleased smile to Martella and Eutropia, who were celebrating across the way. It took several minutes for the cacophony to die down.
Now, please, we come to the final matter of the evening, said the speaker. Today is a day of exaltation, a day of celebration. Non-voting members may enter the Senate floor now to witness the most distinguished honor to be granted to one of Taldor's very own and very gifted artisans.
Hundreds of dignitaries, additional aides, and other visitors crammed into the Senate floor as he said this. The Senate floor felt like it was bursting at the seams.
Please all now a moment of silence for the Grand Prince, Stavian III, the High Lord of all of the Principality of Taldor, and the Emperor of all its constituent holdings beyond.
Everyone stood, and was solemnly silent as the back door was opened.
A dozen hulking members of the Ulfin Guard came out and stood arrayed around the podium atop the central circular stage of the chamber. Walking cautiously with the aid of a golden cane, Grand Prince Davian III ascended to the tall stage that overlooked the hall from its center. He raised a single hand to calm the murmurs of the assembled crowd. A member of the prince's Ulfin Guard came down to where Calbio was sat with the others and escorted the thrilled-looking man to stand several paces behind the prince. "It is quite the assembly we have here today," said the Grand Prince. "I don't think I've ever seen the Senate building packed so full, especially not for any of my previous speeches. Even my lovely daughter, now a woman, sits among the players of Opara's greatest game. Of course, none of you are here for me. No, today is about something else entirely. Today is about elevation. It is no secret that today is about exalting others to a new status in life. I'm sure many of you have had the opportunity to meet Calbio here. He is a man of the people, elevated at the urging of all the ladies, lords, senators, and aides present in the chamber. I think we should all give him a rousing round of applause to commemorate this momentous change in his life." The room erupted into cheers as Stavian paused in his proclamation. The Grand Prince of Taldor smiled widely as he took in the adulation of the crowd. As the applause abated, Calbio's Ulfin Guard escort gently pushed him forward, but he almost knocked the unsteady commoner down, as he was clearly going a bit weak in the knees, standing beside the Grand Prince Stavian. The leader of Taldor maintained his calm, placing a hand on Calbio's shoulder without ever taking his eyes off the crowd. "I understand your parents sacrificed everything to help you reach this day, my boy, saving up for your apprenticeship and the tools you needed to achieve greatness. And today you are a grateful son, no doubt making them proud. I too understand what it is to sacrifice. I have given so much for the people of this nation. A brother, a son, a lifetime of service." He paused and licked his lips. "Even my own daughter's loyalty, perhaps." A hush seemed to fall on the crowd at this strange remark. Marius strained to try and see the princess's face, but he was too crowded to get a good look at her. Then Stavian pulled the awkward Calbio closer to his side. "But unlike you, Lord Calbio, these Taldans, my children, truly, are not grateful. They scheme and plot, dream of hanging their dutiful father and placing my daughter, a woman, sir, on the lion throne. And they have seen fit this very day to induct you into their conspiratorial ranks. And that is why here now you, Lord Calbio, will be the first among them to die." And with that, the Emperor of Taldor plunged a jeweled dagger between the ribs of the astonished man in his clutches, as Calbio's hot blood spattered out among the spectators below, and as senators cried out in shock, the doors opened, and no fewer than 50 armed soldiers came in through the side doors. They were not soldiers of Taldan garb, but were masked in black cloth and wearing dark tunics under their breastplates of dull grey. Without skipping a beat, they began to move in, cutting down the attending masses in a wholesale slaughter. Within mere seconds, the Senate floor became a killing field, as Stavian III looked around in deranged wonder at the butchery before him. After a moment's confusion, most of the Ulfin guards closed ranks around their emperor, cutting down anyone, black-clad warrior and panicked senator alike, who approached too close. The masked soldiers guarded the doors and made wide arc slashes with their swords to keep the crowds at bay. As the conflict escalated, other members of the crowd began to pull hidden weapons from their clothing to engage the Stavian agents. Some of these appeared to be members of Taldor's famed Lion Blades, the intelligence agents of the nation sworn to protecting Taldor and her people from interference by foreign powers. Demi was quick to recognize Kethan Zalar, the helpful guard who inspected them upon entry into the Gala, as she leapt into combat and shouted, "Lion Blades, to your duties! Defend the Senate! Defend Taldor!" Even Martella Lothide and Princess Eutropia drew their weapons to fight back the assassins. Demi stood up and shouted, "Kethan!" Kethan had not forgotten Demi's request, and she threw her short bow and quiver across the way. Demi grabbed them both out of the air, and threw the quiver over her dress, and began to shoot arrows into the assassins. "Hey, what about my stick?" cried out Diyanah. "You didn't bring my stick!" Kethan seemed distracted with her own fighting, however. Marius appeared to be in shock over the death of Calbio. Demi was firing arrow after arrow as quickly as she could loose them. Aurelius and Diyanah turned to each other. "This was Pytherius' doing," said Aurelius. "I'm sure of it." "Come on, Marius, we need you with us, big guy," said Diyanah as he shook Marius out of his reverie. Marius recovered and looked up at the approaching assassins. He and Diyanah both raised their fists in unison. End of chapter. Thank you so much for watching. That was episode 2 of my War for the Crown series of Pathfinder 616. We are making our way slowly but surely through the first book, Crownfall. The first episode, I assume you've already seen if you're watching this one. I put up a little while back, and one of the bits of feedback that I got was that instead of ending it with just end of chapter, I should spend a little minute to talk about some of the GM decisions that I made as I ran that part of the adventure. So the video that you've just seen is the big Exaltation Day Gala. I put it together. It's about an hour-long video. I think in actual game terms that was about 3 or 4 sessions, and each of those sessions was 3 or 4 hours long. So you're looking at between really 9 and 12 hours of content that was condensed down to an hour. So there's a lot of stuff in terms of what actually happened that was left on the cutting room floor. But it's a super fun kind of opening event for War for the Crown. Looking back, it's all the characters are getting to know each other. You're also introducing a huge cast of characters. It's really fun. And I think it's one of those memorable moments that will stick with all of your players throughout the rest of the adventure. So you really want to get it right. One of the things that I found as a GM that was really useful was creating NPC cards, because there are so many NPCs at the Gala that the players can interact with, influence, that I found it would be a cool idea to pass out cards so that they didn't have to keep asking me who all the NPCs were. And then you can also, if you've got a big map, you can lay down the cards in the locations where those characters are located. So I've got some samples. Here we go. They look like this. And essentially, I've constructed these cards. It's very simple. I have a card sleeve. It's just a simple printed piece of paper and a magic card to give it some heft. Slot the card between the magic card and the sleeve, and there you go. Really scrappily built. Just you need a color printer, that's it. The cards themselves I designed using the Magic Set Editor, which is a free tool that you can find online for creating magic cards. In this particular case, I've just put the name of the person and a little description, and then I slot that where it needs to go. The other thing you'll notice is I've got some stickies. Here I've got 2 yellow stickies and a green sticky. Just simple stickies that you can buy anywhere. And the way that I use the stickies is, the way that social encounters work in this game is you meet the NPCs, you do a discovery check to find out what skills influence them. Typically this is a diplomacy check or a knowledge nobility check. And then you proceed to influence them by making one of the 3 optional checks that you can make. So as people discover information about the NPCs, I actually write on the back side of the card the skills that are used to influence this person. So for example, this is Honora Piscum, an NPC that hasn't shown up yet. She's influenced by knowledge local, knowledge nature, profession farming, and survival. That's all pretty cool. And so every time they successfully influence the NPCs, they will get a yellow sticky. And when they have acquired enough yellow stickies, they will get a green sticky, which means they've won favor. And doing that will have various effects. So this is mechanically how I did all of my social encounters over the course of War for the Crown. I found it to be very effective. I hope that helps you in your games. Next episode will be out in about 3 weeks, and I hope to see you there. Thank you so much. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.